Welcome to this week's episode of Crush, the show where we talk about your favorite teen heartthrobs from the 90s and 2000s. This week's crush is Brad Renfro. So,
Can we talk about this in a minute? Seriously, I'm like this close to being done.
before we get into this one, please remember to like, save, and share this video to let the FYP know to bless other people with my content. And don't forget to let me know who your crushes are in the comments. Just a quick warning before we start talking about Brad. This one really is crushing, and it involves the discussion of drug use. If that is something that is difficult for you, please take a break from this week's crush. Brad Baron Renfro was born on July 25th, 1982 in Knoxville, Tennessee. Brad's parents were divorced when he was quite young, and from the age of 5 onward, he was raised by his father's mother, Joanne Renfro. His mother had remarried and moved to Michigan, and it's reported that he didn't have that much to do with his father over the course of his life. Brad's trajectory to stardom was a complete antithesis of his peers. There weren't any Buster Brown ads or Kellogg's commercials. Instead, he was discovered at the age of 10 by casting director Mally Finn, who had been tasked with casting the role of Mark Sway, a troubled delinquent from a Tennessee trailer park in Joel Schumacher's The Client. Dennis Brown was a retired Knoxville police officer who had overseen the DARE program that Brad had been a part of and had recommended that Brad audition for the role. Bowman had told the LA Times that Brad was a problem child who was out of control. He had the swagger and street smarts of a 19 or 20-year-old at the age of 10. And that was exactly what Schumacher was looking for. The Client filmed over the course of the summer of 1993 and became the top-grossing film in 1994. It thrust an unknown child actor from Knoxville directly into the limelight, winning him the Hollywood Reporter's Young Star Award, and it earned him a nomination for People magazine's infamous Top 30 Under 30. His role in The Client secured him a lead role in The Cure alongside Jurassic Park's Joseph Mazzello, and the lead role as Huck Finn in Tom and Huck with fellow teen heartthrob Jonathan Taylor Thomas. Brad's ability to lean older than his 13 years had director Peter Horton telling the Chicago Tribune that Brad had tremendous charisma and sex appeal. Girls were following Brad around during the production of The Cure and leaving him birthday cards with messages stating that they dreamt of waking up next to him. He was only 12 and hadn't even reached the teen part of being a teen heartthrob. While on the set of Tom and Huck, Brad had divulged to a member of production that he was already sexually active. His girlfriend at the time was years older than him. He was only 13. Despite his young age and lack of training, Brad continued to land role after role after role. Those that worked with him attributed it to the amount of time he spent on set. Most kids would go home with their parents after the crew had wrapped for the day, but it was clear that Joanne didn't have a handle on Brad. He would spend most of his time wandering around set asking questions and learning from the crew. In 1996, Brad appeared in Sleepers, a movie about a group of young boys who ended up in a detention center after a prank went wrong. Brad's co-stars were Hollywood heavy hitters Robert De Niro, Kevin Bacon, Dustin Hoffman, and Brad Pitt. Sleepers had a much darker tone than Tom and Huck. The film was shot when Brad was 13 and featured scenes of intense verbal, physical, and sexual abuse. The following year, he filmed Apt Pupil, another film with a markedly dark tone. Production for Apt Pupil came under scrutiny when 3 minors claimed that they were coerced into completely disrobing for a shower scene. Prosecutors declined to file charges, but Bryan Singer, the director, would face further accusations regarding misconduct with minors years later. Apt Pupil came out in 1998, around the same time that things started to take a turn for the worse for Brad. On June 3, 1998, Brad and his cousin were arrested and charged for drug possession. Brad was found with 2 small bags of cocaine and a bag of marijuana. He entered a plea bargain and agreed to random drug tests. He would go on to appear in a handful of straight-to-video movies after this, his addiction taking precedent over his talent. He was barely legal, and yet he had already been to rehab a handful of times. In the summer of 2000, director Larry Clark showed up at Brad Renfro's house. The young actor was slated to appear in Larry's upcoming project, Bully. Brad had sworn to Larry on the phone that he was clean. But when Larry showed up at Brad's house that summer, Brad emerged with blood streaming down his track mark-riddled arms. He was bloated, and he looked significantly older than his 18 years. Financing for Bully was contingent on Brad's appearance in the movie, so Larry packed him up and drove Brad down to Florida. Brad went into full withdrawal during the car ride. Larry hired a trainer and a babysitter for Brad. He took him to 12-step programs, but Brad was still sneaking alcohol. Larry, a former heroin addict himself, said that it was one of the worst cases of addiction he had ever seen, and he had seen a lot. While in Florida that summer, Brad attempted to steal a yacht with one of his friends from the Fort Lauderdale harbor. Brad was charged with grand theft and criminal mischief. That following January, he was sentenced to 2 years probation and was ordered to pay for the yacht repairs and investigators' costs. That spring, he was arrested again for underage drinking, violating his probation. He violated his probation again in January of 2002 when he was arrested for public intoxication and driving without a valid license in Knoxville. That one landed him in a 3-month-long substance abuse treatment program. Somehow, amidst getting arrested regularly, Brad appeared in a handful of films, with Ghost World being the most prominent film he had appeared in for quite some time. Towards the end of 2005, Brad was charged with a misdemeanor count of driving under the influence and 2 counts of driving with a suspended license. That arrest earned him 10 days in jail and 18 months of alcohol education classes. Less than a month later, on December 22nd, he was arrested again when he attempted to purchase heroin from an undercover LAPD officer doing sweeps of Skid Row. The photo of his arrest was plastered all over the front of the LA Times. After admitting to detectives that he had been using heroin and methadone, he pled guilty and was sentenced to 3 years probation and was fined $450. Less than 6 months later, he spent 10 days in jail for driving under the influence and attempted heroin possession. Despite his struggles, Brad continued to act, appearing on shows like Law & Order, Criminal Intent, and The Hollywood Files. But in June 2007, he found himself in trouble again after violating his probation by failing to enroll in a long-term drug treatment program. He was warned by the judge that if he violated his probation twice more, he would end up in a live-in rehab facility or, even worse, jail. On the evening of January 14, 2008, Brad was drinking heavily in the apartment he shared with his girlfriend and cousin in LA. He went to sleep around 2 a.m., and when his girlfriend left the house the next morning at 9 a.m., she said that Brad was still sleeping in his bed. She could hear him snoring. 2 hours later, when his cousin went to check in on him, she found him unresponsive in bed. She dialed 911 at 10:52 a.m. on January 15th. Paramedics arrived on scene and pronounced Brad dead at 11:04 a.m. The autopsy report indicated that Brad had died of acute heroin-morphine intoxication. He was only 25 years old. His father claimed that he had seen Brad several days before his passing and that he was doing better, that Brad had wanted to move away from acting and do more with his life. But then again, Brad's father had been asked to stay away from the set of Apt Pupil as production felt he wasn't a good influence on his son, so who knows if he was telling the truth. So what happened to Brad? How did such a massive talent fall so quickly? The truth is that Brad had started his spiral downwards at a very young age. He reportedly told people that he had been born addicted to heroin and that he had started injecting the drug around the age of 12. He also said that his mother had enabled his heroin use. Joanne had tried her best to rein him in, but what do you do with a kid who was smoking pot at the age of 9 and getting drunk at 11? He would often arrive to set exhausted. When people asked Joanne what was going on, she wouldn't give them a straight answer. She was constantly lying to production, and after a while, they realized that there were much bigger issues going on with Brad that she had no control over. 17 days after Brad was found deceased in his apartment, Joanne passed away from natural causes. She was only 76. They say that people die of broken hearts all the time, and I wouldn't be surprised if the loss of her grandson was just too much for her own heart to bear. It's theorized that Brad's demise was Hollywood taking advantage of a troubled kid, that they put him through the ringer, pushing him to the edge. But Brad was born on the edge. It's why he was so sought after for those dark, unsettling roles. He's endlessly praised in interviews for his raw talent and ability to memorize his lines without issue, something that many child actors struggled with. After his passing, his friends and family mourned him as a kind, generous soul. Ironically, shortly before he died, he had "fuck all y'all" tattooed on the back of his neck. Brad lived life the way that he wanted. That's why it wasn't surprising when Brad's obituary revealed that he was survived by a son. In 2003, while in Japan on an acting gig, Brad fathered a son, Yamato Renfro. Yamato had remained in Japan with his mother, but had spent time with his father in Tennessee shortly before his passing. Despite having so much to live for, Brad seemed to spend his days chasing death. It's easy to say that he could have been a huge star, that he could have had everything. But it would seem that in Brad's case, he really was destined to burn out rather than to fade away.